Hey there. Tonight, you wake into a year that later generations will frame in gold, hang with flags, and polish until it shines like a heroic coin. But the first truth you feel is much smaller and much colder. It is the bite of a wooden floor under your feet before sunrise, the stale breath of smoke caught in the walls, and the strange realization that in 1776, a normal day could wear a person down more quietly than any battlefield. Before speeches, before banners, before anyone starts announcing destiny, there is a room with too many bodies in it, a hearth that must be coaxed back to life, and a life that depends on getting 100 plain things right. If that sounds like your kind of evening, press like, subscribe, and come closer to the fire with me. Now let the room dim. Let your shoulders unclench. Let your jaw soften. Breathe a little slower and step gently with me into the morning. You do not wake to an alarm. You wake because the dark has thinned. The window, if this house is fortunate enough to have glass, gives off a pale gray suggestion rather than light. The shutters are rough. The air is cool enough to make your nose sting for a moment. Beside you, there is another breath, maybe two. A child rolled sideways in sleep. A sibling. An apprentice. A grandparent. Privacy is not really part of the architecture here. Warmth matters more. Space is a luxury. Solitude is practically a rumor. The bed beneath you answers every shift with a dry whisper. Straw, corn husks, feathers, if the household has done well enough for that sort of softness. The ticking is patched. The sheets are coarse linen, rubbed thin in places, rougher in others, carrying the faint smell of lye soap, skin, I smoke, and years of use. Honestly, if you are standing here with me, I think the first thing you would notice would be the texture of everything. Nothing in this room is smooth in the modern sense. Wood catches at the fingertips. Cloth has a grain to it. Blankets are heavy with their own memory. Even the air feels slightly textured, as though smoke has taught it how to settle. For a moment, you stay still. That pause matters. It may be the quietest moment the day will offer you. Somewhere beyond the wall, a rooster begins with the confidence of a man who owns no clock and therefore assumes he is always correct. A second rooster answers from farther off, sounding equally certain and perhaps slightly offended. The sound slips through the cold morning and into the room as if it belongs to the house itself. Nobody curses it. Nobody reaches to silence it. The day has opinions here, and one of them is that you have slept long enough. You sit up slowly. The blanket falls from your shoulder and the chill touches your skin. Your feet search for the floor and find wood that has kept the night inside it. The cold runs up your legs in a neat little warning. There is no dramatic misery in the motion, no collapse into despair, just the ordinary reminder that comfort is conditional. Fire has to be made. Water has to be carried. Food has to be prepared. Animals will not politely wait for your mood to improve. The body learns this lesson so early that by adulthood, it barely feels like a lesson anymore. It feels like weather. A hearth sits at the center of the room, like a patient animal that must be fed before it will speak. In the ash, there may still be a buried hint of life. A few embers banked carefully the night before, under gray powder. You kneel there. Your joints complain softly, not because you are old, but because everyone in this century sounds a little older by morning. You stir the ashes with practiced care. The room is quiet enough for small sounds to matter. Ash shifting, a soft crack, then the tiny red glow, almost embarrassed to be discovered. You feed it slivers of wood, thin and dry, and bend closer. The first breath you give the fire is gentle, the second more confident. Then comes the orange answer, small but decisive, and with it, a warmth that is more emotional than physical at first. I have always found it strange that later generations talk about freedom in this year as though it lived in declarations and speeches alone, when so much of life still depended on whether this little flame agreed to wake up. Without it, you do not cook. You do not warm water. You do not soften yesterday into something livable. You certainly do not make the room kinder. Around you, the household begins to stir. Someone coughs into a blanket. A child turns over and mutters something that vanishes before it becomes a word. Another body sits up, and the ropes or slats of a second bed answer with a tired creak. The room changes not by a sudden rush, but by a gradual filling of intention. Sleep drains away. Responsibility takes its place. Time is not something you read first thing in the morning. It is something you feel. The light beyond the shutter says one thing. The animals say another. Your own hunger says a third. Mechanical clocks do exist, of course, but not in every home, and not always with the sort of honesty one might hope for. A rooster is often more dependable, though far less humble. In many places, the day is measured by habit, shadow, and sequence. First, the fire, then the water, then the feeding, then the rest. If you know the order, you know the hour well enough. You rise and begin to dress. There is no separate costume for waking and another for living. What you slept in may be what you keep on, adjusted and tightened into daytime usefulness. The linen shirt goes over your skin with a cool firmness. It smells faintly of soap and old sunlight. Then, wool, if the season asks for it. Scratchier, heavier, less forgiving. The garments do not drape. They settle. They insist. Nothing stretches to flatter you. Cloth here is not interested in self-expression. It is interested in surviving another year. Perhaps you will too. Buttons are precious. Teeth are retied. Seams are checked with a glance, because a weak seam noticed in the house is an annoyance, while a weak seam discovered in the field can become a long day of irritation. Fabric is labor stored in visible form. Spinning, weaving, cutting, sewing, patching, washing, drying. Each garment contains so many hours that it feels almost rude to wear it carelessly. A coat may have belonged to someone else before you. Shoes certainly remember older seasons. Leather stiffens and softens according to its own logic, not yours. When you pull on your shoes, the leather is cool, and the shape of them reminds you that comfort is not the same thing as fit. The first few steps are always a negotiation. The body adjusts. It always adjusts. That may be the quiet genius of people in this century. They adjust until discomfort becomes background. They do not expect the world to greet them softly. So, when it occasionally does, it feels like grace. The room smells different now that everyone is moving. The embers have found flame. Smoke rises, and with it the old scent of wood, ash, damp wool, and stored grain. There is something sweet in the air, too, faint as a memory. Maybe cornmeal from yesterday. Maybe dried apples somewhere in a cupboard or sack. You know that feeling when a place smells so completely like itself that you could identify it with your eyes closed. Home in 1776 smells like smoke first, then effort. Outside, the settlement is waking in layers. A wagon wheel complains across hard ground. Hooves strike with that hollow sound that belongs only to early morning, when the air is still cool and the road has not yet turned soft with traffic. A door opens, another closes. Two voices exchange a greeting brief enough to carry no gossip and warm enough to confirm belonging. There is no hurry in the modern sense, but there is no dawdling either. The pace is steady, not leisurely. Everything leans toward use. And this is the part I think many people miss. Most of the people moving through this morning do not imagine themselves inside a famous year. They are not standing in a beam of historical importance, one hand over the heart, waiting to be remembered. They are wondering whether the woodpile is lower than it should be, whether the bread will stretch, whether the animal with the odd cough looks worse than yesterday, whether the child who felt warm in the night is warmer now. The grand story hovers at a distance. The small story is the one with dirty hands. A lot of diaries from the century feel like that when you read them closely. Not empty of larger ideas, but crowded with practical ones. Honestly, I find that deeply moving. History so often arrives to us in clean lines, but life was never clean. It was smoky and crowded and slightly damp around the edges. It was half repaired and fully inhabited. You step to the door. The latch lifts. Morning air meets you all at once, and it carries the smell of cold earth, old leaves, manure, and wood smoke drifting from neighboring chimneys. Chickens scrape the yard with serious little steps, as if they personally intend to reorganize the continent. A pig, somewhere nearby, offers a grunt that sounds like judgment. From the barn or shed comes the restless shifting of animals who understand very well that human delays ought not interfere with breakfast. One of the strange mercies of this world is that the body is rarely left wondering what it is for. Every part of the morning answers the question. Hands for lifting, arms for carrying, backs for bending. ears for listening, eyes for noticing when something is wrong before it becomes costly. Even children are drawn quickly into this design. A bucket is placed into small hands because small hands can still carry. A bit of kindling is gathered because little legs can fetch it. The lesson begins early. Being useful is one of the first languages anyone learns. The sky lightens by slow degrees. Gray becomes pearl, then pale silver at the edges of the fields and roofs. The world does not suddenly appear. It reveals itself. Fence posts come into being. Bare branches sharpen. The road finds its shape. If you were walking this way with me, boots pressing into the same packed earth, you might think the morning beautiful, and it is. But beauty here never arrives alone. It arrives with tasks hanging from it like weights. Water must be fetched. That fact sits over the morning like law. There is no turning a handle indoors and listening for convenience. A well, a pump, a stream, a bucket, a shoulder, a hand. Every drop that enters the house enters because someone carried it. The cold of the handle, the weight of the pail, the slight sway of the water on the walk back. These are part of the shape of daily life. And because they are repeated so often, they disappear into the mind until a single spilled bucket can feel like an insult. The same is true of firewood, of mending, of feeding animals, of checking weather in the sky because weather is not conversation here. It is instruction, of glancing at a roof and wondering whether it will hold another season, of looking at your own hands and realizing they are not smooth, because smoothness would suggest a life less occupied with staying alive. There is a curious tenderness in all this hardness. I do not mean sentimentality. I mean the way people make room for one another inside necessity. A parent lifts a blanket from a sleeping child and folds it without waking them. Someone leaves the warmest place by the fire for an older body to take later. A heel of bread saved from yesterday is set aside for someone who will need it. None of this is announced. None of it earns applause. It is just the quiet skill of not making an already difficult world any harsher than it must be. As the fire in the hearth settles into a steady working glow, and the yard outside begins to fill with movement, the morning stops being potential and becomes fact. You are in it now, fully dressed, alert, slightly hungry, already thinking 3 tasks ahead. The ordinary day in 1776 has opened around you like a gate with no interest in whether you feel equal to it. It expects you to step through, and you do, carrying smoke in your clothes, chill in your bones, and the first low hum of labor already rising with the light. Night in this world does not come with a clean ending. It gathers in layers, and sleep does the same. By the time darkness truly settles over the house, the room that served as workshop, dining place, and passage through the day has changed its nature again. Benches are shifted. Bedding is spread. A blanket is borrowed from one corner. A mattress is dragged from another. The house rearranges itself around bodies the way a ship rearranges itself around weather. When you lie down, the first thing you feel is not softness. It is negotiation. Straw shifts under your shoulder. The mattress answers your weight with a rustle that sounds dry as late grass. If the ticking is filled with feathers, they gather in clumps that support one part of you while abandoning another. Ropes beneath the bed frame hold if they are tightened properly. If they are not, the whole thing dips toward its center with the weary philosophy of old furniture. You do not expect perfection. You expect something that will not collapse in the middle of the night. And in this century, that counts as a kind of luxury. You are rarely alone. This is worth saying twice because modern imagination resists it so strongly. Sleep here is social. Bodies line the room according to warmth, need, age, and available space. Children are tucked in where an adult hand can reach them if they wake. Two siblings share because there is no reason not to. An apprentice may sleep near the kitchen or the hearth. An older relative may have the favored place closest to what heat remains. Privacy, in the modern emotional sense, has not yet become a sacred right. Warmth is more persuasive than solitude. The blankets smell alive. Wool keeps a little of the animal about it, especially when damp air has touched it. Linen smells cleaner, though clean is a flexible word here. Soap has done what it can. Smoke has done more. The whole room carries that old familiar scent of ash, tallow, cloth, breath, and wood that has soaked up years of weather. If you were standing in the doorway with me now, I suspect you would know immediately whether you could sleep in such a place. Some people would find the closeness comforting. Others would be climbing the walls within the hour. And there are the insects. Better to admit them than pretend nobility about it. Fleas and lice are not the stars of the night, but they are frequent supporting performers. A scratch in the dark is common enough that nobody comments. You wake, rub at an ankle or wrist, shift your weight, settle again. It is not pleasant. It is simply folded into expectation. The same with cold drafts in winter. The same with trapped heat in summer. The same with the occasional smell of animals housed nearer than modern dignity might prefer. The house itself never fully sleeps. Wood ticks softly as temperatures fall. Somewhere, a hanging iron pot taps once against the hearthstone. A gust outside nudges at the shutter, and the latch answers with a muted little click. In deeper dark, these sounds grow larger because there is nothing mechanical to drown them. No motor hum, no distant highway, no electric buzzing. The night is quieter, yes, but because of that, every small sound arrives with more personality. You may wake once in the middle of the night, maybe twice. And here is where modern people might begin calling it a problem. But for much of this period, waking between sleeps is ordinary enough to be unremarkable. The dark is long. The body drifts up from rest, hovers there, then returns. Some pray, some think, some stir the embers. Some lie still and let thought pass over them like weather. You are not expected to sleep like a stone dropped into a lake. You sleep like a tide, coming in, withdrawing, coming in again. There is a strange intimacy in those waking hours. You hear the person beside you breathe through the nose because the air is cool. You hear a child sigh and turn over. Someone in the room coughs once, then settles. In the yard outside, a horse stamps. Farther off, a dog decides for reasons of its own that the universe should be briefly informed of its existence. Then stillness again. You know that feeling when the world seems huge and very near at the same time. That is what these hours can feel like. By dawn, when the waking comes for good. It does not arrive like a clean curtain rising. It gathers. First, the room is less black. Then the outlines of the blankets become visible. Then the shutter leaks enough gray to separate wall from ceiling. The body returns in pieces. Neck, shoulders, cold feet, stiff fingers, hunga, thought. The person beside you shifts, and suddenly the whole room is back in the world. Dressing begins almost immediately, and it too has a rhythm that belongs to necessity. The linen shirt first, cool and a little rough, slid over skin that has not forgotten the night air. Linen matters because it can survive punishment. It can be scrubbed hard. It dries in sun and wind. It is not elegant in the way later centuries would define elegance. Though when newly washed and carefully mended, there is something clean and honest about it that feels more satisfying than beauty. Then wool. Wool over the shoulders. Wool around the arms. Wool at the chest if the season bites. In winter, this is gratitude. In summer, it is endurance. We think of comfort as the aim of clothing, but in 1776, durability often wins the argument. A garment that keeps weather out and survives another year has done its duty, even if it scratches a little and carries a smell that reminds you faintly of sheep and smoke. There are complaints about such things in letters. By the way, people were not saints. They noticed smells. They disliked chafing. They just understood that irritation and necessity often shared a drawer. You own very little by modern standards. That is not necessarily abject poverty. It is simply the arithmetic of labor. Cloth takes time. Thread takes time. Buttons cost more than a careless hand deserves. Even a plain garment contains so many hours of spinning, weaving, cutting, stitching, fitting, washing, and repair that throwing anything away before its final surrender would feel nearly immoral. Shirts become smaller shirts. Smaller shirts become patches. Patches become rags. Rags become something stuffed into a crack where winter wind has made itself unpopular. Shoes wait near the bed, heavy and faintly misshapen from having become yours over time. Leather does not cater to the foot at first. It must be taught. You slip them on and feel yesterday lingering in them. Dust from the road, damp from grass, stiffness from cold. Ties are fastened. Stockings are straightened. A skirt is settled into place, or breeches are pulled up and adjusted. Everything about dressing says that the body is now moving from sleep into usefulness, and appearance matters, though not always in the way later centuries imagine. Not fashion first, but respectability. Clean enough, mended enough, properly tied. To appear too careless suggests disorder. To appear too fine may invite comment of another sort. Cloth speaks. Neighbors know how to read it. A patched elbow says thrift or need. A well-brushed coat says effort. A missing button says either misfortune or indifference. Neither is invisible. By the time everyone is dressed, the room has changed again. Bedding is folded or shaken out. Blankets are moved aside. The bed ceases to be a bed and becomes part of a room with other tasks to perform. There is very little in this house that is allowed a single purpose. Then comes breakfast, if breakfast is the right word, because the meal is not separate from the day in any decorative sense. It is simply the first fuel. You do not ask what sounds good. You ask, by your actions rather than with words, what exists, what keeps, what can be warmed, what can stretch. The fire, coaxed back earlier, now becomes useful in a new way. A pot darkened by years of soot is hung or set close. Water is added. Meal is added. The spoon moves slowly through it all until steam begins to rise. Cornmeal, very often. Mush. Porridge. Something plain and warm and filling. The smell is not luxurious, but it is dependable. Earthy. Sweet in the faintest way. Bread, too. If there is bread enough to spare this morning. Not airy, modern bread, but something denser. Chevere. More insistent. You tear it with your hands. The crust is hard if it is a few days old. That does not make it undesirable. It makes it normal. Fat matters here. Butter if there is butter. Drippings if there are drippings. A little spread of anything rich changes the whole mood of a morning meal because your body recognizes immediately what it can do with those calories. Sweetness is rarer. Molasses, perhaps. Honey, perhaps. Sugar if the household can afford such extravagance and is willing to let some vanish this early in the day. The point is not pleasure, although pleasure appears in flashes. The point is steadiness. Eat enough now, or the body will complain later in the least forgiving part of the day. There is often little ceremony in the eating itself. Some sit, some stand. A child balances a bowl with two determined hands. An adult leans one hip against a table or bench because sitting down fully feels like something that might make them too comfortable to rise again. Spoons are common. Forks are less so. Knives are tools before they are table manners. Wooden bowls hold the smell of their history. Smoke has touched them. Salt has touched them. Hot, fat, and old grain have touched them. That history enters the meal whether anyone remarks on it or not. Drink arrives with its own practical philosophy. Water from a trusted source, if trusted water is close. cider often, small beer, diluted ale. Fermentation offers a kind of reassurance where wells and standing water do not. Even children may drink what a modern table would consider surprising, because the world has trained everyone to care more about safety and sustenance than about categories. I think one of the saddest confusions modern people bring to the past is imagining repetitive food as joyless by definition. Repetition can be comforting. When the body knows what to expect, it settles. When the household knows how much meal is left, it thinks more clearly. Variety is delightful, yes, but reliability is a deeper pleasure when life is uncertain in so many other directions. Still, small luxuries leave an imprint. A bit of smoked meat added to the pot, milk still cool from recent handling, apples dried last autumn and brought back now in soft pieces. The meal brightens for a moment. Someone notices. Perhaps no one says so aloud, but the room subtly warms around the fact. A better morning than usual. A kinder one. Children eat quickly, though not always neatly. Adults keep half an eye on them while also watching the fire, listening for the animal that sounds wrong outside, thinking ahead to chores. There is very little such thing as doing one thing only. Breakfast is eaten while the day is already being planned in the mind. After this, the water. After this, the yard. After this, the field, the shop, the washing, the mending, the horse, the road. The meal enters the body and is immediately claimed by the future. Then it is over. Bowls are scraped. Bits are saved. Crumbs do not vanish thoughtlessly. A heel of bread remains useful. Fat remains useful. Waste is not immoral in the abstract. It is simply foolish, and foolishness is expensive. What lingers after the meal is warmth more than taste. Warmth in the stomach. Warmth in the room. Warmth in the brief sense that the day has been entered properly, as one steps into cold water more bravely after the first shock. The body feels steadier now, not indulged, steadier. That is enough. Enough matters more than plenty. As the last spoon is set down, the meal folds back into the room without any dramatic transition. The breakfast table, if there is one, becomes work surface again. The pot is scraped or cleaned. The fire is adjusted for whatever comes next. A child is redirected. A sleeve is rolled up. Someone reaches for a bucket. Someone else for a tool. Morning, having first arrived as gray light and breath on cold air, has now become a lived fact. And with the body clothed, fed, and fully returned to the hard little miracle of usefulness, you are ready to step beyond the door and into the sound, smell, and long labor of the waking world. By the time you step fully out into the day, the settlement has already found its rhythm, and the first thing that reaches you is sound. Not noise in the modern sense, not the constant mechanical roar that eats every silence now, but a woven field of smaller sounds, each one distinct enough to be recognized, each one telling you exactly what kind of morning this is. A rooster finishes his self-important announcement from somewhere behind a fence. Hooves strike packed earth with a hollow knock. A wagon wheel complains over a rut with the old wooden groan of something that expects no sympathy. Nearby, metal meets metal in a neat, bright ring, probably from a smith beginning early, or from a tool being set in place for another long day. What strikes you first is how far the sounds travel. Without engines, without glass-sealed windows, without the electric haze of modern life, every voice carries a little farther than you expect. A greeting tossed from one doorway to another feels clear enough to touch. A child laughing down the lane sounds as if he might be standing just behind you. Even the quick clatter of a chicken flapping itself onto a low fence has its own crisp little authority. The world is not silent. Not at all. It is simply legible. You can hear work beginning, hear animals negotiating with it, hear people easing themselves into the day with the resignation and steadiness of those who know exactly what is waiting. You walk over ground that has been walked into memory. The road is not smooth. It carries grooves from wagon wheels, patches of dried mud that hold yesterday inside them, and the dark little signs of animals that live closer to people than modern life would ever permit. Your shoes feel every change underfoot, not enough to slow you, but enough to remind you that walking here is an act of attention. You cannot drift beautifully down the lane like a figure in a painting. You look where you are going. You step around what should be avoided. You keep a little awareness in the ankle and knee. Twisting something in this century is not a tragic inconvenience. It is a direct argument with survival. The air itself feels populated. Smoke from breakfast fires still hangs low in threads and curls. Fresh cut wood adds a sweet, raw note where someone has already begun chopping. Leather from a harness or a shoe shop offers its own sharp, oily smell. Somewhere, a baker, or more likely, a household oven, is giving the morning a soft edge of bread. And under it all lies the plain, truthful scent of earth. Damp where shade has protected it. Dusty where the early sun has already begun its work. You breathe all of it in because there is no practical way not to. The air enters you with the day attached. People move with purpose, but not with that strange, brittle rush we mistake for importance now. No one is hurrying merely to prove they are busy. They are busy. The proof is all around them. A woman crosses the yard carrying something under one arm and a child in the other hand, her body balancing two tasks at once, as if she were born with extra hinges. A man adjusts a load in the back of a wagon, pose, looks up at the sky for half a heartbeat, then returns to the rope with a different tension in his hands. Two boys move past you carrying a pail between them, taking themselves very seriously, which is charming until you remember that the seriousness is not entirely play. The water matters. Their effort matters. Childhood here already has one foot in labor. You hear voices and begin to notice that sound, in 1776, is deeply social. A town or village can be understood by the kind of conversation it permits. Short greetings are common, but long, useless chatter is rare in the working part of the day. That does not mean people are cold. It means they are occupied. A nod is enough. A quick question about weather is enough. A remark about a horse looking lame or a fence needing repair is enough. Meaning is packed tightly into these exchanges. People do not waste language because time itself feels less decorative. Every sentence ought to earn its place. There is also the matter of recognition. You know the feeling when a place is small enough that strangers have a different sound from neighbors. Their voices sit wrongly in the air, or perhaps not wrongly, just newly. Their footsteps hesitate in places where local feet do not. In 1776, many communities live with that kind of sonic familiarity. You know who belongs by how they move, by when they speak, by whether they call out before entering. Privacy is scarce, but so is anonymity. This can be comforting or suffocating depending on the day and the nature of your conscience. As the morning opens wider, you pass the places where labor becomes more visible. A cooper's yard gives itself away by the particular rhythm of wood being persuaded into shape. Tap, sit, tighten, dist. A blacksmith announces himself with flashes of sound that feel cleaner than the blunt noise of wagon wheels. A carpenter's work has its own intimate music. The rasp of a saw, the scrape of a plane, the quick, sharp report of a hammer doing something final. What I like about these sounds is that each one means something is being made or fixed. Consumption does not dominate the air. Creation does. Repair does. Usefulness does. If you stand still for a moment, which perhaps you should, you realize the morning has layers. Closest to you is the ordinary business of footsteps, fabric, breath, and voices. Beyond that sits the animal layer, the mutter of livestock, the scatter of chickens, the occasional offended pig. Above that floats the tool layer, all those rings and scrapes and knocks that tell you the settlement has fully awakened. And above everything rests the weather, which has its own sound if you know how to listen. Wind in leaves, a soft, moving hush through grass, the distant warning tone of something unsettled in the sky. People here read weather the way others read letters. By now the day has moved into labor completely, and you begin to understand that work in 1776 does not begin with a whistle or end with a formal release. It simply takes over whatever body is available. If you are on a farm, the land sets the order. Animals first, perhaps, or fields depending on season and urgency. Nothing about the arrangement is random. The body remembers it before the mind names it. Hands close around familiar tools, and suddenly the morning belongs to effort. If you are in a town, the pattern changes shape, but not spirit. Shops open, benches fill. Apprentices begin where they left off yesterday. Heat rises in workspaces long before noon because fire and friction are ancient companions. You feel this most sharply in the body. Work enters through the hands first. Fingers wrap around wood worn smooth by repetition. Palms settle into grooves left by previous days. Then shoulders join in. Then the back. Then the legs. By the time the body is fully awake, labor has already claimed it. There is no romanticism in that. It is not the satisfying ache of elective exercise. It is the ordinary contract between person and circumstance. If you do not work, the day punishes you later. If you do work, it punishes you more slowly. The trick is to choose the better punishment. One of the strangest modern fantasies about the past is that people were somehow more patient because life was slower. I am not sure that is true. I think they were simply less surprised by effort. When the fence needs mending, you mend it. When the meal needs earning, you earn it. When the weather changes the plan changes. The emotional energy that would now be spent on indignation is often spent then on adjustment. Honestly, that may be one of the most alien things about the century. The willingness to accept inconvenience, not as injustice, but as weather in another form. Children slip through this world differently than adults do. They are lighter on the ground, quicker in the turn, still capable of laughter that arrives out of nowhere and leaves just as fast. Yet even their play often rehearses the duties waiting for them. A stick becomes a tool as easily as a toy. A hoop rolled down the lane is still a lesson in following movement, in natamsien, in keeping one's body aligned with the world. A child carrying kindling may grin while doing it, but the kindling still gets carried. This blend of usefulness and youth gives the whole scene a curious tenderness. They are learning to belong by helping. The hours move not by clock face so much as by completed tasks. A certain chore finished means the morning has deepened. A certain patch of sun on the wall means food cannot be much farther off. A certain weariness in the shoulders tells you the day has entered its serious middle. Work teaches time to the body until the body no longer needs a clock's opinion. And then there is women's labor, which is everywhere and somehow still easy to miss if one looks only for noise. It does not always ring like metal or drag itself across dirt with visible weight. So later generations have often looked past it, which is its own kind of blindness. But once you see it properly, you cannot unsee it. The whole household floats on it. Food does not simply appear because a pot is on the fire. Someone had to remember what remained in storage, judge what could be spared, measure it by experience, not by abundance, and then turn it into something that would carry bodies through the next stretch of effort. Clothing does not remain wearable by mercy. Someone patches, turns, scrubs, trees, to folds, and repairs until cloth gives up. Children do not slide untouched from need into competence. Someone directs, corrects, comforts, cleans, and keeps half an eye on them even while doing 6 other things. A woman in this century may appear to move in circles, but the circles are the architecture of survival. She stirs something on the fire, then turns to a torn cuff, then sends a child after more water, then checks a loaf, then lifts a smaller child away from danger, then pauses only long enough to remember what else is still undone. The movement is so practiced that from a distance, it can look almost effortless, which is perhaps the cruelest trick labor ever plays. Work done well often disguises itself as ease. In truth, it is concentration stretched over hours. You might see laundry soaking in one place while mending weights in another. You might see a woman pause with one hand on a table, eyes narrowed, not from illness or sadness, but because she is calculating. Flour left, soap left, candles left, thread left, daylight left. There is a counting here, real and constant, even if the numbers never enter a grand ledger. Household management in 1776 is a form of quiet mathematics. Misjudge by too much, and comfort is lost. Misjudge by too little, and waste follows. Neither is harmless. By late morning, the first wave of energy has already spent itself. Not ended, spent. The difference matters. There is still a great deal left to do, but the body has now entered the true terms of the day. Your muscles are warm. Your hands no longer protest the first grip. Sweat has made its arrangements with cloth. The road has absorbed more footsteps. The animal sounds have settled into routine. The settlement is no longer waking. It is fully itself, and you, now fully inside it, understand something important. Everyday life in 1776 is not dramatic, but it is relentless. It asks for endurance in dozens of small installments. It wants your back for an hour, your patience for another, your memory for another, your hands for all of them. The morning does not crush you in one grand gesture. It wears you gently, steadily, until usefulness becomes a kind of second skin. And as the sun climbs higher and the air shifts toward noon, you move with the others into the next part of the day, already carrying in your body the plain, unromantic weight of how this world keeps going. By the time the day leans into its middle, you begin to move through those spaces where exchange happens. And the first surprise is how little they resemble modern shopping. There is no wandering for pleasure, no bright arrangement of objects designed to tempt you into wanting what you did not need 5 minutes earlier. Trade here is practical, direct, and deeply personal. A stall, a doorway, a bench, a barrel with its lid propped open, a basket of goods resting low enough to be touched and judged. A merchant who knows your face before he knows your coin. You do not browse so much as arrive with purpose. The market, if this place is large enough to have one in the formal sense, feels like an extension of the road rather than a separate world. Goods sit where they can be inspected by hand. Cloth is rubbed between finger and thumb. Nails are weighed in the palm as much as on scales. A wheel of cheese or a slab of soap carries its value and smell before price is spoken. You hear bargaining, but not in the theatrical way later centuries sometimes imagine. It is usually quieter than that. A question, a pause, an adjustment, a reminder of a past favor, a note that payment may come after harvest. Business here is threaded through relationship, and relationship is never entirely absent from business. Cash exists, of course. Coins move from hand to hand. Silver glints, copper dulls. But actual money feels strangely scarce, almost shy. You may carry a few pieces and still feel poor in the practical sense, because coin is only one form of wealth, and often not the most useful one. Land, tools, livestock, stored grain, cloth, labor, trust. These weigh more heavily in the life of a household than whatever jingles in the pocket. There are places in this century where money crosses the palm less often than promises do. This changes the emotional texture of exchange. When you owe, the debt does not vanish into a system. It remains attached to names and faces. A storekeeper may know not only that you are short this week, but why. He knows what your field yielded last season. He knows if illness moved through your house. He knows whether you are reliable, whether you settle late but honestly, whether your word tends to hold when weather has not been kind. Credit here is not abstract. It is social memory turned into a ledger. Around the edges of this market life, information moves with the goods. A woman pausing with a basket hears who is sick and who recovered. A man arranging a purchase learns that the river road is worse than expected, or that a wagon broke an axle 2 towns over. A child sent to fetch salt returns with half-remembered adult conversation clinging to the edges of his mind. News is rarely announced. It arrives folded inside necessity. You begin to see how shopping, if we can call it that, blends into belonging. The seller knows your household. You know his habits. Perhaps you know he is fair when sober and difficult when tired. Perhaps he knows you always hesitate over cloth, because once bought it must last a very long time. Little things are remembered. A debt settled promptly. A favor done in winter. All of these float invisibly above the table during trade. No receipt can account for them, but they absolutely affect the price of trust. By early afternoon, you become more aware of food again, not because the meal itself is grand, but because hunger is honest and work keeps asking for more. Midday eating is built on what the season and the household can support. Bread again, perhaps, because bread is patient. Salted meat, if any, remains within reach. Beans, onions, coarse pies, cheese, apples dried months ago, something stewed long enough to forgive toughness. Repetition is not failure here. It is continuity. The body learns what will come and greets it with gratitude rather than complaint. Meals beyond the morning are often shaped by preservation. Every bite contains planning. Salted pork means someone thought ahead while weather still allowed it. Dried herbs mean someone gathered and hung them before frost. Cider means apples were not just eaten, but transformed. Butter means milk was worked by hand into lasting richness. A simple bowl of beans may look humble, but it is standing on a whole ladder of earlier labor. You can taste storage in everything. Smoke, salt, sourness, where fermentation has turned danger into safety. There's less sweetness than a modern tongue expects, and more depth than it would initially appreciate. Grease matters. Fat matters. The body rejoices in it because calories are not abstract numbers here. They are warmth for later, strength for lifting, insurance against sudden trouble. When bread is dipped into drippings or spread with a little saved fat, the act carries a seriousness that no elegant menu could mimic. What people drink with the meal continues the logic of the day. Safe water, if truly safe. More often cider, small beer, or other diluted drink that makes sense within local habit and local caution. There is very little romantic glamour in any of this. It is practical. It keeps people moving. It lets work continue. And yet, there can be pleasure too. The relief of something warm. The salt that arrives exactly when sweat has taken too much. The softness of bread after the road. These small satisfactions shine more brightly because they are not guaranteed by abundance. Children eat among adults, not in a parallel universe of special plates and softer expectations. They watch how portions are judged. They learn not to waste because waste is visible. If a crust goes uneaten, someone notices. If a bowl is scraped clean, someone notices that too. No one may say much. The lesson still lands. Food teaches the household as surely as any sermon does. And then comes the afternoon when the day begins to reveal its harder textures. Fatigue makes itself known. Small aches step out of the background. Hands roughen as the work wears on. This is also when the hidden systems of care and cleanliness continue their quiet labor. Water is fetched again. Hands are rinsed when they can be, though not lavishly. Dishes are managed. Waste is carried away. Tools are wiped or set where they will not be ruined by damp or left to injure a careless foot at dusk. There is no clean break between labor and maintenance. Maintenance is simply labor in another coat. Illness hovers in this world more closely than many modern people like to imagine, not always as a dramatic threat, but as a steady awareness. A cough noticed. A child quieter than usual. A fever guessed at by touch. A stomach complaint measured in worried glances and adjustments to meals. Health here is not taken for granted. It is observed, negotiated, guarded by habit as much as by remedy. Home knowledge matters immensely. Herbs dried and stored. Teas made bitter and useful. Poultices mixed. Rest offered when possible, though possible is sometimes a very narrow window indeed. If someone in the household falls sick, the day rearranges itself around that fact. Work still continues, but now, in more anxious circles, someone sits nearby. Someone keeps the fire steadier. Someone checks the face again and again, as if the answer might change between looks. Physicians exist, but they are expensive, distant, and not always more reassuring than a capable older woman with a cupboard of remedies and a memory full of earlier survivals. Care begins at home because almost everything begins at home. By late afternoon, the social world changes shape again. the most urgent work has either been done or postponed into tomorrow. This is when the smaller pockets of leisure appear, though leisure may be too polished a word for it. Relief might be better. A pause with a neighbor. The story begun while hands still occupy themselves with shelling, mending, scraping, or patching. A fiddle, if someone owns one, and the day has not drained all music from the body. Cards, perhaps. Dice, perhaps. A child turning a hoop in the dirt, while an adult pretends not to smile. Pleasure here is often brief, but because of that, it arrives with surprising force. I think modern people underestimate how nourishing shared presence can be when distraction is scarce. A short game, a remembered story, a song sung by several voices that know the tune better than they know one another's secrets. These things are not separate from survival. They are part of it. They smooth the edges of a life that would otherwise be all task and no release. And yet, under even these lighter moments, the larger tensions of 1776 remain. News moves by mouth and letter, and so political uncertainty drifts in, not as a grand national drama, but as local disturbance. A new regulation that makes trade harder. A tax mentioned with irritation rather than ideology. A traveler carrying rumors from elsewhere. A man who has begun speaking more openly than before. Another who suddenly speaks less. People do not necessarily experience politics first as abstract principle. They experience it as inconvenience, risk, opportunity, and argument folded into ordinary life. You can hear caution in the way certain conversations narrow when unfamiliar ears come near. Loyalty is not always a thing one declares loudly at the wrong table. In some households, opinions differ and remain half-covered for the sake of peace. In some communities, a man may know what he thinks and still keep it tucked away because the road home is long and he would rather not travel it with enemies. That uncertainty is part of the air of the year. History later turns many people into symbols. Daily life keeps them human, which is messier and more interesting. As evening comes on, households begin drawing inward. Animals must be checked again. Fires revived or adjusted. Tools collected. Food set by for morning. Children gathered from wherever the last game left them. Doors are secured, not with the heavy mythology of constant danger, but with practical wisdom. Night is different. Light becomes precious. Distance becomes less manageable. What can be finished now is finished. What cannot waits. This is also the hour when harder truths become impossible to avoid if you are looking clearly. Slavery is woven through the daily life of this world, not confined to one dramatic scene or plantation image. In many places, it sits at the center of household and economic routine, so normalized by those who benefit from it that they scarcely name it. Enslaved people labor in fields, kitchens, workshops, barns, yards. Their work fills the same ordinary categories as everyone else's, and yet carries an entirely different weight because the work and the body performing it are claimed by another's will. That is one of the great moral darknesses of the age, and an honest day cannot move past it lightly. What makes it darker still is the way routine can disguise cruelty. Orders given casually, labor expected without thanks, skill relied upon while dignity is denied. The ordinary structure of the day, so tiring and demanding for the free, becomes for the enslaved something harsher, more controlled, more relentless. Resistance exists, certainly, in delay, in hidden knowledge, in community formed under pressure, in small acts of self-preservation that ownership can never fully extinguish. But one cannot watch this world honestly and pretend its daily comforts are not often underwritten by extraordinary suffering. By the time the sky deepens and the first stars begin their patient work overhead, you feel the whole day sitting in the body. Trade, food, labor, gossip, caution, comfort, unease, all of it. The world of 1776 has not tried to impress you. It has simply insisted on itself. Great events are coming. Yes, famous phrases are coming. But before all that, and beneath all that, there is this: the market table, the salted meal, the owed coin, the tired hands, the hidden suffering, the cautious talk, the evening fire. History is always asking to be simplified. Daily life refuses. It remains crowded, contradictory, human. And as the light lowers further and the household turns itself toward night, you follow it there, carrying the full, uneven weight of what a normal day has really cost. Evening settles more firmly now, and as the light drains from the road and fields, your attention begins to stretch beyond the fences and walls that have held the day together. The settlement looks self-contained at first glance, but that is one of its quiet illusions. The land around it is not empty. It has never been empty. Long before these houses learned the smell of wood smoke, long before these paths were pressed into wagon ruts and property lines, other feet knew this ground in ways the newcomers still only partly understand. You hear it first in names: rivers, trails, clearings, ridges, bends in the water, all of them carrying words that survive the people who tried to ignore the mouths that first spoke them. These names remain because they are useful, because they fit the land too well to be replaced easily, because even conquest is often lazier than memory. A settler may speak a place word with confidence and still have no honest understanding of the history inside it. That too is part of the century. If you were standing here with me, at the edge of the settlement, where the last fences begin to thin, you would feel how layered the ground is. A path used now for hauling goods may once have been a trail cut for seasonal movement, for hunting, for trade, for diplomacy, for return. A patch of good soil chosen for planting may have been recognized long ago by people who read the land with greater patience. Knowledge lingers in practical habits. Corn is planted. Medicines are gathered. Routes are followed. Much of it borrowed. Some of it stolen. Plenty of it used without thanks. In some regions, indigenous people remain close enough to be seen regularly. Trade still happens. Words are exchanged. Information moves between communities. Goods cross hands that have every reason not to trust one another, and yet still meet out of necessity. In other places, the original inhabitants have been pushed farther back, or scattered, or spoken of in tones that make them sound farther away than they really are. Language does some of the erasing before force finishes the job. You notice how settlers speak about land. Available, open, waiting. The words are so calm that they almost hide the violence tucked inside them. Land is described as if it has no memory of human use until a fence is driven into it by the right sort of hand. That habit of speech may be one of the most revealing things in the whole century. People do not always need to tell direct lies. Often they only need to describe a place in a way that leaves its first people out of the sentence, and still the presence remains. In the shape of the trails, in the crops, in the geography of caution, in the small knowledge that one should not travel that direction after heavy rain, that the river rises here first, that these trees mean water nearby, that this root can help a fever, that this bark can do something else. Settlers rely on indigenous knowledge more often than they admit. Guides are sought when roads fail. Advice is taken when weather turns. Survival borrows quietly from the very people expansion tries to dismiss. There is fear, too, of course. Fear travels faster than understanding in any century. Stories move from household to household and lose balance as they go. A warning becomes a rumor. A rumor becomes a certainty. People repeat what they have heard, and each retelling puts a harder edge on uncertainty. Children absorb these tensions before they can interpret them. They learn which direction is safe, which direction is watched, which stories produce lowered voices around the fire. As darkness thickens, you begin to understand how travel feels in this world. It is never casual. Even short journeys ask something of the body and the mind. Roads can be poor. Weather can shift. Daylight can leave faster than expected. A place half a day away already feels meaningfully distant because returning from it must also be managed. Travel is measured not only by miles but by fatigue, bemut, by weather a horse is worth using for the errand, by whether the road is decent enough for wheels, by whether one can safely arrive before the world becomes all shadow. You walk or ride with awareness. Boots meet ground that changes from firm to soft without apology. Dust rises in dry weather and clings low in wet. Wagon wheels complain. Harness leather stretches and squeaks. The road does not flatter the traveler. It negotiates with him, or with her, on rough terms. A person setting out knows to carry what is needed and to expect little comfort on the way. Water, food, perhaps a tool, perhaps a weapon, certainly a sense of the route and of the sky above it. I have always found it strange that modern people talk about old roads as if they were merely inconvenient. In truth, they reshape thought. Distance. In 1776, America is felt in the bones. You do not promise lightly that you will be somewhere tomorrow, unless you truly mean to spend your body making that true. A road can tire a horse, lame a foot, break a wheel, ruin a mood, and reorder a whole week. Movement itself carries a weight we have mostly forgotten. And then there is the weather, that other ruler whose authority no one pretends to escape. The sky is not decoration here. It governs. It tells you whether washing should be attempted, whether seed should be trusted to soil, whether a journey is worth risking, whether a roof will hold its peace. People watch cloud shapes the way later generations watch printed forecasts. A change in wind direction means something. Pressure in the air means something. The smell before rain means something. Bodies often know before language does. Summer heat settles into cloth and skin with a patience that can feel personal. Work slows, not because laziness has won, but because the body is being bargained with. You drink more carefully, seek shade more deliberately. Tempers shorten not from bad character alone, but from a sun that has been pressing all day without mercy. Winter is a different lesson. Cold enters through walls, through floors, through the gap beneath the door, through the hand that must still touch water and tools and wood. In winter, the fire is not atmosphere. It is policy. People here do not discuss weather as idle conversation. They discuss it because it decides things. A storm can delay work, spoil food, isolate a household, drown a road, flatten a field, make a trip impossible, make tomorrow harder. One good thaw can feel like a pardon. One dry spell can make everyone quieter. The emotional life of a community is tied much more directly to the sky than many people would now tolerate. By the time evening pulls you back toward the settlement, law begins to make itself felt in subtler ways. Not the grand law of documents and principle alone, but the local law of custom, expectation, reputation, and punishment. A person in 1776 does not experience order as an invisible system humming along elsewhere. Order has faces: the constable, the magistrate, the elder who knows everybody and forgets very little. Rules are close enough to be personal. Much of justice is local, immediate, and uneven. A hardworking man may be forgiven what would damage another. A useful family may be treated more gently than one already disliked. Public punishment remains visible enough to do part of its work through shame. The law wants to correct, but it also wants to be seen correcting. Stocks, fines, public reprimand. The details vary. The principle stays familiar. The community is expected to witness what happens when its expectations are ignored. None of this is especially fair in the modern sense. Standing matters. Gender matters. Race matters terribly. Wealth matters. This century talks often about principle, while practicing a good deal of preference. That contradiction sits everywhere if you know how to look for it. But people still rely on local order because they must. Better a known authority than a road full of uncertainty after dark. Better the flawed judgment of neighbors than no judgment until a problem grows teeth. As night grows deeper, households close in on themselves. The world outside feels wider now, and also more uncertain. Firelight begins to dominate the inner space. Candles are used, but sparingly. Each flame a small expense with a visible wick. Shadows lean into corners. The house shifts from daytime function to evening enclosure. This transition can feel almost ceremonial, even when no one treats it that way. Tools are put down. Doors are checked. The last tasks are finished not because every job is done, but because light has announced its limit. Now the softer, more difficult subjects move closer. Marriage, reputation, intimacy. These live under watchful conditions. In 1776, the community notices who visits whom, who lingers, who seems too eager, who seems too distant, who has delayed marriage longer than expected, who has married advantageously, who has not. Affection exists, certainly, but public life gives it less space to perform itself than later centuries might prefer. Practicality stands beside feeling at every threshold. Marriage is often discussed in terms of stability, labor, inheritance, respectability, and alliance. Love may be hoped for. It may grow. It may even arrive first. But it is rarely asked to carry the whole structure alone. Households require competence. Land requires managing. Children require raising. Food requires producing. Partnership is not sentimental decoration on life. It is part of the machinery that keeps life from falling apart. Courtship itself happens under observation. Doors remain open. Rooms remain shared. Visits are noted. Engagements may be discussed by others before the couple has finished understanding themselves. Reputation is collective property in a way that can feel suffocating. A bad impression does not stay private. A mistake can echo. Women bear the harsher weight of this system, especially where sexual conduct is concerned. Shame is not distributed evenly in any century, but in this one, it can be almost brutally efficient. Still, tenderness finds ways to live. In practical acts, in a shared joke, in labor done side by side, in the handing over of a tool without needing to ask, in a look across a room where everybody else is busy. A couple in this century may rarely speak the language of romance, as later novels teach it, and yet they may understand each other with a precision that is its own kind of devotion. Reliability can be love. Endurance can be love. Showing up tomorrow can be love. By the time you feel the full quiet of the evening settle over the household, the whole day has begun to contract into memory. The road, the weather, the unease around loyalty, the hidden histories in the land, the strain of travel, the local force of law, the careful negotiations of closeness. All of it begins to soften under the rule of darkness and fire. But it does not disappear. It simply becomes interior, thoughtful, more intimate. You know that beyond the thin walls lies a world still unresolved, a country not fully itself yet, a landscape carrying older names and newer claims, roads that will be walked again tomorrow, weather that will write the next version of the day before dawn. And inside, in the warmth, stitched together by labor and habit, you feel what everyday life in 1776 truly was. Not a single story, not a clean moral fable, but a layered ordinary existence in which comfort and threat, belonging and dispossession, closeness and caution all lived together, as naturally and uneasily as smoke curling upward through a darkening room. That may be the deepest lesson of the day. The past was rarely made of constant drama. More often, it was made of endurance, under conditions people did not choose, and of adaptation so complete it became invisible. The road teaches it. The land teaches it. The weather teaches it. The people, in all their caution and contradiction, teach it too. Now the household has drawn in close enough for age to become visible. Daylight flatters strength because motion hides weakness. Evening is gentler and more honest. It reveals who lowers themselves carefully onto a chair, who pauses before standing, who lets the younger hands lift the heavier thing without argument. Old age in 1776 arrives without any great public announcement. No one names a person old all at once. The body simply begins negotiating differently with the same tasks. An older man near the hearth may still be busy, but the labor has changed shape. Less lifting, more advising. Less speed, more memory. An older woman may still move constantly, but with shorter journeys between pauses, with a hand that goes to the lower back now and then, with an eye that tracks the room while others rush through it. Strength does not vanish. It thins, concentrates, chooses its moments. Experience replaces force where it can. And because there are no pensions, no retirement plans in the modern sense, no large institutions waiting to absorb the tired body, aging happens inside the household, if fortune allows it. Elders remain close. They continue to contribute in whatever ways remain possible. Child care, storytelling, repair, supervision, judgment. Memory itself becomes a form of labor. Remembering when seed failed before. Remembering which family can be trusted on credit and which one should be watched. Remembering the old path when the river road is too wet. These things carry weight. Still, I do not want to romanticize it. Growing old in this century is not made soft by community alone. It is vulnerable. If health goes wrong, the whole household must shift. If pain grows, work is lost. If sight weakens, ordinary tasks become negotiations. Older people know this. You can hear it sometimes in the way they apologize for needing help, even when the help is given gladly. Gratitude and fear often share the same breath. By this point in the evening, the deeper truth of illness begins to sit closer too. In daylight, sickness can be one more difficulty among others. At night, it becomes more intimate. A cough sounds heavier in a dark room. A fevered face looks stranger by candlelight. A person who seemed merely tired at noon can feel worryingly quiet by evening. Health in 1776 is never assumed for very long. Too many households know how quickly an ordinary complaint can become a serious one. Remedies come first from memory and from the hands already present. A bitter tea, a poultice, rest, if rest can be spared. A hand at the forehead, not because it gives a number, but because touch itself is a kind of measuring. Too warm, less warm, worse than yesterday, better than this morning. Care lives in those comparisons. The household becomes observant. Someone sleeps lighter. Someone keeps water close. Someone listens through the night for a change in breathing. What strikes me most is that illness belongs to everyone once it enters a house. One person suffers, but everybody adjusts. Meals alter. Chores are redistributed. Tempers tighten or soften depending on exhaustion. Fear moves quietly through the room and sits down with the family as if it were another relative. There may be prayers. There may be practical treatments. Usually, there are both, because the century does not see much reason to separate the two. Religion by now rests everywhere in the room, even when no one speaks explicitly about doctrine. Faith in 1776 is not always theatrical. Often it is habit, a phrase said before eating, a quiet request that someone be remembered in prayer, a verse half recalled in illness, a sermon brought back into conversation when hardship demands interpretation. Belief here is not neatly stored for Sundays only. It flows through ordinary life the way smoke flows through cloth, quietly, persistently, until it seems part of the material itself. Church, when attended, offers more than theology. It offers gathering, reputation, confirmation that one belongs somewhere larger than a single household. The benches may be hard. The sermons may be long. The room may be cold in winter and close in summer. Yet people go because it stitches community together. It tells them the weak has shape. It provides language for endurance. In a world where so much can fail, the repeated form of worship offers a steadiness that many seem to need. And yet, as the room deepens toward night, leisure still finds a little place at the edge of all this seriousness. Someone may tell a story. Someone may hum. A fiddle may come out if the household is fortunate enough to own one and not too tired to use it. A game may be played, though quietly now. The fire makes everybody slower. It rounds off the day. Faces ease. The strict usefulness of afternoon begins to soften into companionship. This is also when news settles into people more fully. What was heard earlier at the market or along the road now gets turned over by the fire and examined more carefully. A rumor about a regulation, a traveler passing through, a local dispute, a price, a letter from elsewhere. Political feeling in 1776 often lives here. In these low-lit conversations where ideology is still mixed with grain, weather, debt, loyalty, and fear, a person may speak more honestly at home than in public, or become more cautious because the wrong ears might still belong to kin. Loyalty remains uncertain for many. Some know their minds clearly, some do not. Some know, but prefer not to announce it. That ambiguity is easy for later generations to judge and much harder to live. When your livelihood depends on neighbors, when authority is near, when roads carry soldiers and rumor alike, silence can be wisdom. A man who says very little may not be cowardly. He may simply have counted the cost more carefully than others. As night goes on, the house itself changes character. Firelight narrows vision, which does something curious to thought. It makes the near world feel more important and the far world less manageable. Corners fall away. Faces glow and darken in turns. Hands moving through mending or toward cups or across a child's hair become small theaters of ordinary tenderness. I think this may be why evening memory often feels so strong. The world simplifies without becoming simple. The subject of death now moves close enough that no honest account of 1,776 can keep it outside. Death is not hidden here. It does not live in hospitals or in professional distance. It enters homes, remains there, is handled there. Most people will see the dead directly, more than once in their lives, and often many times. Children are not entirely shielded from this. They watch adults prepare the body. They see grief moving through chores. They learn early that loss does not suspend practical life for long, however much the heart might wish it would. When someone dies, the room changes immediately. Familiar space becomes threshold, washing the body, dressing it, setting it straight, covering mirrors in some households, opening a window in others, stopping a clock if there is one. These acts vary, but all of them attempt to give shape to the moment when a person becomes absent. Neighbors help. Graves are dug. Prayers are said. Food may be brought because the living still need to eat even when appetite has left them. This is one of the hardest truths of every century and perhaps one of the kindest too. Life insists on continuing, and that insistence can be both cruel and merciful at once. And yet this closeness to death seems to sharpen life rather than flatten it. Ordinary moments gain value because no one can fully pretend they are guaranteed. A warm meal, a repaired shoe, a child recovering from fever, a spouse returning safely from the road. All of these feel more significant in a world where their opposites are familiar. Mortality lives close, so gratitude often does too, even when it is not spoken in sentimental terms. By now, the children are folding toward sleep, whether they consent to it or not. One leans against an adult's shoulder. Another has already gone quiet in that peculiar way children do, where they seem still awake until the next second proves otherwise. Bodies are lifted, blankets adjusted, spaces negotiated. Bedrooms are not private kingdoms. They are shared arrangements of warmth and necessity. Beds may hold more than two people. Mattresses rustle with straw or husks or feathers. Linen smells faintly of lye soap, smoke, skin, and long use. Everything is close. Night in this century does not seal itself away from sound. The house breathes. Wood creaks softly. Wind touches the walls and windows. Animals shift outside or nearby. A distant dog lets out a single opinion and then thinks better of continuing. The fire cracks low and regular. If there is a clock, it may tick. But many homes rely more on body and light than on mechanical certainty. Time after dark becomes thicker, less measured, more felt. People often wake in the night, not from alarm necessarily, but because sleep itself is often segmented, layered, lighter at the edges than modern myths about 8 perfect hours would suggest. A person may rise to tend the fire, drink a little water, think, pray, step outside briefly, listen, then return to bed. These waking periods are not always treated as problems. They are part of the architecture of the night. The body in 1776 knows darkness differently. It does not expect to be unconscious straight through like a machine turned off. And this, perhaps, is the strangest thing of all. After everything the day contained, the work, the dependence, the fear, the unequal burdens, the closeness of illness, the nearness of death, the care required by every object and every body, the room still becomes gentle. Not easy, not luxurious, gentle. A child asleep, an elder quiet by the fire, a spouse turning under a blanket, a banked ember holding enough heat for morning. The ordinary grace of continuation. By the deepest part of the night, the whole day has folded itself into the dark. The road, the market, the weather, the talk, the sickness, the law, the hidden griefs, the visible labor, all of it now rests in bodies that must begin again tomorrow. Everyday life in 1776 America was never simple, and it was rarely comfortable for long, but it was intimate, shared, repetitive in ways that could be exhausting and reassuring at once. It asked people to endure almost constantly, and, in return, it gave them these small hours, this enclosure of firelight, fabric, breath, memory, and temporary peace. You lie down now, inside that peace, or as close to peace as the century allows. The mattress shifts beneath you. The blanket carries warmth from other nights. The room smells of smoke and wool and wood and living. Someone nearby turns over. Someone sighs. The house itself seems to lower its voice, and as sleep approaches in its imperfect, human way, you understand that the most honest truth about 1776 is not that it was heroic, nor pure, nor picturesque. It was difficult, ordinary, communal, unjust, tender, exhausting, and deeply alive. It kept people busy enough to forget themselves and close enough that forgetting one another was almost impossible. And in the darkness, with the fire breathing low and the world held just outside the walls, that difficult, ordinary life finally allows itself to rest. The house has gone as quiet as it is ever going to get, which is not the same thing as silence. Silence in 1776 is a thinner thing than people imagine. It lets every small sound stand up straighter. The banked fire settles with a soft inward sigh. A board deep in the wall gives one polite complaint, and then another. Outside, something small moves through leaves or dry grass, too light to be threatening, but clear enough to remind you that the world beyond the door has not gone to sleep just because you have. You lie still for a moment and feel the room with the parts of the body that listen better than the ears. There is the faint chill near the floorboards. There is the warmer pocket where blankets have been holding your shape. There is the rough place in the sheet where mending gathered the cloth more tightly than before. There is the smell of smoke pressed into everything. Wool, hair, wood, skin, and the softer smell beneath it. Old soap, old straw, old labor. Honestly, a modern person would probably call it too much. But once you have lived in it long enough, the room begins to smell not dirty, but known. This is the hour when the century feels least interested in performance. The day no longer has to prove anything. No one is presenting themselves to neighbors now. No one is bargaining. No one is greeting. No one is measuring flour or weather or reputation aloud. The body has been returned to its basic terms. Warmth, breath, weight, pain easing a little, then announcing itself again when you turn. A person beside you shifts, not fully waking, only floating toward the surface and then sinking back. That is another truth the modern imagination often misses. Sleep here is not always one long sealed room. It comes in chambers. You enter one and then another. You rise briefly and drift again. Many people wake in the middle of the night, and they do not immediately treat it as failure. They listen, think, pray, pull the blanket higher, touch the edge of the mattress as though confirming the world is still there. Then they let themselves go under once more. If you were standing here with me, or rather lying here under these heavy layers, you would notice how wakefulness itself changes after midnight. Thought does not march. It wanders. It brushes past practical things first. The barrel needs checking tomorrow. The shirt cuff is thinning. There is less meal left than there should be. Then, without asking permission, the mind drifts toward the larger fears that daylight keeps busier. What happens if the cough worsens? What happens if the horse goes lame? What happens if the next winter bites harder? What happens if the debt is called in before the crop is ready? What happens if the letter brings bad news? And yet, even these thoughts do not always arrive with drama. They arrive like cold air through a seam. Familiar. Manageable. The century has trained people to live with low, steady forms of uncertainty, so constantly that terror often settles into something quieter, a permanent readiness, a habit of bracing lightly against the future. The children have their own night logic. One kicks free of a blanket and is covered again by someone half asleep. Another mutters a fragment of a dream that vanishes before it can become a sentence. Childhood in this house has no private chamber where fear can be hidden and named with great care. It shares air, warmth, sound, and darkness with everyone else. That may make it harder in some ways, but it also means a child learns very early that the night belongs to many breathing bodies, not to one lonely mind. From somewhere near the hearth comes the smallest glow, hardly enough to call light, but enough to draw the eye if it opens. Fire at this hour is no longer tool or spectacle. It is a promise tucked under ash. Someone prepared it carefully so morning could begin with less struggle. That little red core may be one of the most hopeful things in the room. Not because it is beautiful, though it is, in its buried way, but because it says someone thought ahead. Someone arranged tomorrow before sleep fully claimed them. It is debated how much rest people truly got in a world like this, and I can see why. Some historians look at these interrupted nights and imagine a population always exhausted. Others point out the deep bodily rhythms of labor, darkness, and seasonal life, and argue that people adapted more intelligently than we assume. Both may be true. The body can adapt and still be tired. A person can be practiced at endurance and still ache from it. You turn again, and the mattress answers with its dry whisper. Straw, husk, feather, whatever fills it. All of it remembers movement. Even bedding sounds older here. Nothing is mute. Wool drags softly over linen. Rope in the bed frame answers with a low, tense murmur. The room registers every adjustment. Privacy is not absent only because too many people sleep close together. It is also absent because materials themselves are always speaking. At times like this, the house feels almost like another animal lying around you. It expands when the wind presses. It settles. It breathes through gaps. It holds scent in its ribs. It complains in the cold. It relaxes in warmth. The people inside it do not fully command it. They live in negotiation with it, as with weather, with illness, with the road, with one another. Outside, the night remains broad and difficult to imagine all at once. If the sky is clear, stars will be bright enough to make a person feel watched or guided, depending on temperament. If clouds have covered them, then darkness becomes heavier and more practical, pressing close to the roof and fields alike. Somewhere out there are other houses with their own fires lowered, their own children sprawled sideways, their own old people sleeping lightly, their own sleepers waking briefly to cough or think or listen. The whole countryside is threaded together by these little chambers of fragile rest. And there is always danger, though not always the kind later stories prefer. Not battle, not spies, not some dramatic pounding at the door, though those things can happen in their season. More often the danger is ordinary and stubborn. A spark in the wrong place, a fever changing direction, a baby whose breathing sounds too thin, a freezing snap in weather, a theft that removes one necessary thing, a roof problem discovered too late, a simple fall on a dark stair. The century is full of ways for a household to be undone that never become famous enough to be called history. That may be the darkest ordinary truth in the whole story. Most suffering does not arrive with a trumpet. It arrives as inconvenience that refuses to stop, a soreness that becomes an injury, a shortage that becomes hunger, a debt that becomes loss, a cough that becomes mourning. People in 1776 know this in their bodies, even if they would never phrase it that way. They bank the fire, save the scraps, mend the cloth, dry the herbs, watch the sky, watch the child, watch the road. Not because they are timid, but because vigilance is one of the plainest forms of love available to them. You know that feeling when the body is very tired, but the mind still drifts like a lantern on water. That is this hour. Thoughts become looser, stranger, but not yet dream. Memory and worry begin to wear the same coat. A story told at supper floats back in. So does the sound of the market. So does the face of someone dead these 10 years, looking very calm now in recollection, because memory has a habit of sanding down the roughest edges when it is dark and the room is breathing around you. No one here would say they are practicing mindfulness. That language belongs elsewhere and later. But people do practice a kind of enforced attention. They know the sound of each family member turning in sleep. They know which child cries before sickness and which one simply objects to blankets. They know whether rain is near by the pressure in their joints, whether the fire is healthy by its smell, whether a board creaks because the house is cooling or because a person has just crossed the room. It is an education in subtlety, one that modern walls and switches and insulated lives have partly edited out. Some wake now and use these moments. A note written by candle, a prayer offered without performance, a quiet sip of water, a hand checking the latch, a glance at the moon through a pane that warps it slightly. None of this is grand, but it is deeply human. The night makes room for these small acts because it has emptied the day of louder ones. Before the house fully yields you back to sleep, there may be one more of those middle wakeful moments that people of the century know so well and hardly bother to classify. A woman may sit on the edge of the bed and simply listen to the rain, counting not numbers, but intervals between heavier drops. A man may rub warmth back into his hands and think of a fence rail needing replacement. Someone may whisper a prayer that is half habit, half plea, the kind of prayer that asks for nothing grand, only that the child stay healthy, that the cow not fail, that the weather hold, that the absent return, that the household be allowed one more uneventful day. Those small petitions may be the purest form of hope this century has. And then there are dreams, not the dramatic kind full of symbols one would later force into essays, But the ordinary dreams that sound almost comic when spoken in the morning, dreaming of bread that will not rise, dreaming of being late to a task in a world where clocks barely rule, dreaming of a dead parent seated calmly at the table as if they had only stepped outside for a while. Personal writings suggest people often mentioned dreams matter-of-factly, neither worshiping them nor dismissing them entirely. A dream could be just a dream, or a nudge, or a warning, or yesterday, lingering in the mind after the body had stopped moving. By this hour, the room has become a kind of shared vessel carrying all those half-formed thoughts. No one owns the night completely. One person's cough enters another person's sleep. One child's bad dream changes where a mother lies for the next hour. One strong wind makes everybody listen at once. That lack of separation could be exhausting. Yes, but it also taught people a kind of constant mutual reading that is difficult to recover in more private centuries. They knew one another by breath and by turning, by the sound of worry before it became words, by the exact weight of a silence that meant pain rather than peace. And then, just as gently, sleep returns. Not in a heroic plunge. In surrendering inches, the shoulder lets go first. Then the jaw. Then the hand that had been holding the blanket with too much purpose loosens. The room goes on existing without needing your supervision for a while. Breath joins breath. The ember keeps its little secret. The house settles farther into itself. This is what deep night was really like in 1776 America. Not endlessly romantic, not endlessly harsh, but intimate in a way that can feel almost unsettling now. Too close to the body, too close to one another, too close to fear and tenderness both. A person could not disappear easily into private comfort because privacy itself was thin. But that also meant no one rested entirely alone. Sleep here was shared weather. By the time the hours begin their slow turn toward morning, your body has been taught once again what this life demands: to endure interruption, to rest in fragments, to trust small signs, to take comfort where it appears. A blanket edge, a warm child, an ember under ash, a roof holding through wind, a room full of other breathing people who also made it through one more day. The world outside may still be uncertain, but here, in the deepest dark, the uncertainty has narrowed to something bearable. A few boards, a few blankets, a little heat, a little faith. Enough, for now, to carry you toward the first pale thought of dawn. The final hours before dawn are the gentlest and strangest part of the whole cycle. The house is neither fully asleep nor truly awake. It hovers. If you open your eyes now, the darkness has changed character. It is no longer the thick black of night at its height. It has softened into something thinner, something waiting. The air feels different too. Cooler in some seasons, heavier in others, but always touched by the sense that the sky is preparing to hand the world back. You lie still and listen to the almost silence. The fire is now a memory more than a flame. Somewhere in the room, fabric shifts. Someone inhales sharply and settles again. Outside, before the first obvious birdsong, there is often a pause that feels larger than it should, as if the land itself is taking one careful breath before beginning all over again. And that is really what everyday life in 1776 America was, more than anything else. A beginning all over again. Not a single dramatic struggle sustained by speeches and certainty, but a long chain of repeated returns. To the hearth, to the field, to the road, to the bucket, to the ledger, to the child who must be fed, to the elder who must be helped, to the animal that must be checked, to the weather that must be respected, to the body that must be persuaded to rise one more time. The century is famous now for the loud parts, declarations, campaigns, arguments, founding language, polished bright by memory. But most people did not live inside those moments hour by hour. They lived here, in this room, in these clothes, in these repetitive negotiations with work, hunger, weather, illness, debt, the law, family, reputation, and fatigue. The real texture of the year was not made of constant revolution. It was made of endurance. Honestly, that may be why the past so often confuses us. We keep expecting people to feel historic while history is happening to them. But most people feel tired, cold, hopeful, worried, hungry, relieved, annoyed, grateful, and busy all at once. They feel the need to mend a shirt before they feel the weight of theory. They notice that the meal stores are running low before they notice that posterity will care about the date. The grand story is built from millions of very small practical acts done by people who still had to rise before daylight and coax a fire awake. You can feel the truth of that now as the room begins to gather itself toward morning. One person wakes first, and then another. Not because an alarm shouts, but because life presses at the edges. A body trained by long habit knows when the dark has become fragile enough to leave. A woman may sit up and immediately begin thinking ahead. Water, bread, fire. A man may pause with the weight of yesterday still in his shoulders, then swing his legs to the floor because hesitation solves nothing. A child may burrow deeper for one treasured moment more before being called gently, or not so gently, into usefulness. The first sounds of day are modest. A throat cleared, a shoe found by touch, ash shifted, a latch touched. The room is all action in outline before it becomes action in detail. Someone kneels near the hearth and starts the quiet conversation with the coals. Blow carefully. Lift. Feed. Wait. When flame returns, it does so without drama. And yet, it changes everything. Morning can now begin in earnest. This is one of the most beautiful things about ordinary life, and one of the saddest too. It renews itself even when the people living it are not fully renewed. The body may still be sore. The grief may still be fresh. The debt may still be there. The weather may still look unkind. The same political uncertainty may still be drifting through the roads and markets and letters. The same injustices are certainly still present, woven into the day so tightly that many benefit from them without naming them. The same land still remembers who was here before. The same old fears sit where they sat yesterday. And yet the bread still needs baking. If you were standing here with me, at this first edge of light, you would understand why people in such a world learned not to wait for ideal conditions before living. Conditions were rarely ideal. They were only more or less difficult. So a person learned to begin anyway. That beginning carried a kind of dignity that later generations often miss because it does not sound heroic enough. But I think it is heroic in the truest sense, not the clean storybook sense. It is the heroism of repetition without applause. There is humor in the room too, as there often is in hard lives. Someone mutters at a stubborn boot. Someone makes a dry remark about the weather before even seeing it properly. A child protests the cold floor as if it were a personal insult from God. Little jokes are made because little jokes help. People who live close to necessity are often much funnier than the comfortable imagine. They have to be. A small laugh near dawn can warm a room almost as efficiently as kindling. By now the house smells different again. Morning air enters where it can. Yesterday's sleep lifts off the blankets. Smoke grows fresher. Damp wool, straw, ash, and the faint promise of breakfast begin arranging themselves into the scent of another day. It is not clean in the modern polished sense. It is alive. There is a difference. One by one, the roles return. The one who fetches water knows it. The one who tends animals knows it. The one who must begin kneading, or chopping, or carrying, or checking, or walking, knows it. This is how community is built here, through repeated dependable acts done in close quarters where failure is noticed quickly and help, when given, is likewise impossible to miss. Even love is often made visible through labor before it is ever named through speech. The legal structures, the social expectations, the inequalities, the religious habits, all of them reassemble themselves with the day. A woman resumes work that barely paused. A laborer prepares to spend strength he has not fully recovered. An enslaved person is returned to the demands of a system designed to convert human time and body into someone else's comfort and profit. An elder measures what can still be done without pain becoming too sharp. A child steps closer to adulthood without any formal ceremony marking the distance crossed. Nothing has changed overnight, and yet everything has been handed back to the living to manage once more. It is still debated how people in 1776 understood their own place inside this repetition. Some diaries suggest resignation. Others reveal gratitude. Others show flashes of ambition, irritación, longing, or spiritual calm. There is no single emotional key that unlocks the century, and that is good. Real people deserve better than being reduced to one mood. The truth is more mixed and therefore more human. Some mornings they rose with purpose, some with reluctance, some with private grief, some with practical determination, most with some blend of all four. Outside, the first sure signs of day are arriving now. A bird tests the air with one note. Then another answers. Somewhere, a rooster behaves as if he personally invented dawn. Wheels may creak later. Voices will carry. Doors will open. The settlement will come back into sound. But for this brief span, it is still half dream, half labor, suspended in the blue-gray hush where the world has not fully remembered itself yet. I have always found this hour the most revealing. Daytime can make people look like their occupations. Night can make them look like their fears. But dawn makes them look like what they really are. Creatures of habit, hope, duty, and stubborn continuation, preparing to re-enter the same imperfect world with whatever strength remains. It strips away performance almost as effectively as darkness did, but less tenderly. Dawn asks for action. And that brings us to the plain answer behind the title of the whole story. What was everyday life really like in 1776 America? It was harder on the body than many comfortable fantasies admit. It was less private, less sanitary, less convenient, less equal, less forgiving, and more demanding than nostalgia likes to remember. It was also richer in certain kinds of closeness. Closer to weather, closer to hunger, closer to labor, closer to family, whether one wanted that closeness or not, closer to sickness, closer to death, closer to the sounds of animals, tools, prayer, laughter, and breathing, closer to the immediate consequences of every small decision. A person in this world could not easily pretend to be separate from the conditions of living. Fire had to be made. Water had to be carried. Food had to be produced or preserved. Cloth had to be mended. Bodies had to be watched. Children had to be trained into usefulness. Elders had to be folded into care. The day did not abstract itself into convenience. It kept presenting itself in wood, ash, mud, sweat, smoke, rope, straw, salt, wool, candlelight, and human need. And yet, people did not simply suffer all the time in the flat way that modern superiority sometimes imagines. They joked, loved, traded, prayed, argued, endured, helped, envied, forgave, remembered. They found pride in competence and relief in routine. They stole moments of leisure from the edges of work. They listened to stories, noticed weather, felt the moral weight of reputation, lived inside systems that were often cruel and unjust, and in many cases helped sustain those systems, while also showing one another kindness that history books rarely have space to praise. By now, the room is fully returning to motion. Blankets are folded back. Children are called. The fire is alive enough to be useful. The first task of the day has already replaced the last thought of the night. That is how the cycle wins. Not by spectacle, but by necessity. You can mourn and still need to fetch water. You can be uncertain about the future and still need to pull on your shoes. You can live in a world being politically remade and still need to keep the bread from burning. That is what makes the ordinary so powerful. It does not wait for history to become convenient. The window, if there is one near you, has begun to gray. The objects in the room are returning to themselves. A chair is a chair again, not a dark shape. A coat regains its sleeve. A face regains its age. The world is becoming legible. Soon it will also become demanding. But for one more breath, perhaps two, you can simply witness it. This house, this family or half-family or temporary cluster of shared lives, this little island of warmth and pressure and repetition, this fragile success of having made it through one more night. And perhaps that is the best final thought to carry from all of this. Everyday life in 1776 America was not made meaningful by being comfortable. It was made meaningful by being contingent. The meal mattered because food could fail. The fire mattered because cold could win. The family mattered because death stood near. The mourning mattered because not everyone received it. Every ordinary day was built beside the possibility of interruption. That did not always make people wiser. It did sometimes make them harder. But it also made their small continuities shine with an intensity that is easy to miss from a distance. Now the first full light is on its way. The house must commit to the day. So let the blankets hold for just another moment. Let the last of the firelight fade into the first weak blue of dawn. Let the room remain what it is, a shelter made of labor, memory, smoke, and care. You have walked through its morning, its work, its hunger, its trade, its quiet loyalties, its griefs, its dangers, its shared sleep, and its return to light. And now, at the edge where one day becomes the next, you can let the whole difficult, ordinary, deeply human world of 1776 soften at last into rest. Good night.